simply about opening the door to negotiations towards a more fair trade relationship with our allies, though those allies are challenging the U.S.'s actions at the World Trade Organization at the same time. Ethel?
Garrett Tinney. Thanks, Garrett. Eric?
And for more on this, let's bring in Nile Gardiner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in Washington. So, Nile, you've heard the argument for the administration. They say it's a matter of protecting American jobs, especially in the Rust Belt, and our national security. Do you agree?
No, I don't, I'm afraid, Eric. I think this is a high-risk gambit by the administration. It's going to prove deeply counterproductive. My fear is that these tariffs will actually result in U.S. job losses in the long term. Protectionism generally destroys jobs rather than creates them. Without a doubt, I think we're heading for a trade war with Europe, potentially also with Canada and Mexico as a result of these tariffs, and that is not a good thing for the U.S. economy. I think that the vast majority of initiatives that the Trump administration has launched on the economy have been extremely good, especially the tax cuts, for example, getting rid of burdensome regulations and so on. But these tariffs basically send completely the wrong signal, and it's going to undermine economic growth in the United States and cost American workers their jobs as well.
Well, you know what the president says. I mean, he says that we're being taken advantage of, you know, on their end, of 25, 50, 100% tariffs on what we produce. And he says that it's about time that the United States is treated fairly. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think without a doubt, the U.S. focus should be upon lowering trade barriers across the world. And certainly the European Union in some areas is quite protectionist, actually. And the United States should be confronting the EU over that. But the solution is not to raise U.S. tariffs, which then give an excuse to European protectionists to raise their own trade barriers. And so I don't believe that basically implementing protectionist policies are going to actually create and generate jobs for the U.S. economy. History has shown that protectionism in the past has cost hundreds of thousands of U.S. jobs. And the United States has always been the leader of free trade on the world stage, the leader as well of economic freedom in many, many areas as well. And if we are to backtrack in areas such as free trade, I think that's going to be extremely destructive. It is significant, for example, that the British government has strongly condemned actually these tariffs. This is America's closest friend and ally, and so the United States should be looking towards a US-UK free trade deal post-Brexit rather than raising tariffs in the short term.
Well, what do you see happening? How do you see this is going to roll out? Some would say, well, this is just a negotiating position. It's a starting point by the president to you know, throw that out there, and they'll come to some type of agreement.
Well, what we have seen over the last couple of days has been a very strong response actually from European countries, but also from Canada and Mexico, threatening retaliatory tariffs. So without a doubt, there are many in Europe, especially within the European Commission, who want to see some kind of trade war developing. This would be absolutely disastrous, I think, for both sides of the Atlantic. I do hope that the administration walks back these tariffs and applies pressure upon the EU to lower their own tariffs. And so we do need to see further discussion and dialogue on this, but the solution is not raising tariffs. That's just an excuse for a lot of anti-American protectionists inside Europe who would like to strike against the US economy. And so I do think the administration needs to tread very, very carefully here and advance free market, free trade policies that advance economic freedom on the world stage. That's the right way forward for the United States as the leader of the free world.
And finally, you just hit on something right there, saying that perhaps Europe will lower their tariffs. Do you think at the end there'll be that type of agreement where we may not impose as much of a tariff as is being proposed, and they may lower them to get an agreement?
Well, I think the end game here really should be a lowering of tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic, and also, of course, in Asia as well, and across the world. But the United States must lead by example, and the United States is that great city on a shining hill, that beacon of freedom and liberty, and that applies to economic freedom as well. And so that, I think, is the best way forward, rather than some kind of highly destructive trade war, which many in Europe I think, are keen to implement right now, unfortunately. So I do hope the administration is going to seek, other solutions to the current situation.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Nile Gardiner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Now, as always, good to see you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Of course. Arthel?
The immigration issue will heat up again.